And you've got our sons in the crosshairs of horror at the end of your guns. And your national anthems, they start to all...
Heroes and Patriots is a program about national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. Today is Thursday, September 5th, 2024, and we are streaming live from the studios of KMUD Community Radio in Northern California. I'm Mary Massey, joined by co-host John Sakowitz. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Mary. And good morning to our audience listening to the live broadcast here in Northern California, and to those listening to the web stream throughout the country and throughout the world. Very important show today about ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the West Bank, and the role that U.S. Democrats are playing in facilitating this mass murder.
Heroes and Patriots is archived here at kmud.org, on our YouTube and Facebook pages, and our program website, heroespatriots.org. 707-923-3911 is the number to use if you would like to speak with our guest today on our topic, 707-923-3911. People around the world have heard of the murder of 6 Israeli hostages killed this past weekend. One person was an American, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was 23. 43 American hostages have been killed since the initial October 7th attack. 1,200 Israeli citizens were killed on that date, and the total of Palestinians killed is over 40,000 in the hostilities. No ceasefire or release of the hostages has yet to occur. And with our guest today, we will be talking about that, the conditions in the street, the protests. And so we're very glad that all of you have joined us.
And we'll also be talking about the new invasion of Israel into the West Bank.
Right.
So all the war crimes that are happening in Gaza are now playing out in the West Bank.
Our first guest joins us from Jerusalem and the Bethlehem area. That is Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh. Professor Qumsiyeh is a Palestinian scientist and author, founder and director of the Palestine Museum of Natural History and the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University, where he teaches. He has served on the faculty here in the States, those being University of Tennessee, Duke, and Yale. Since 2008, he researches and teaches at Bethlehem and Biodiversity universities. He is certified by the American Board of Medical Genetics in 2 specialties, clinical cytogenetics, and molecular genetics. We now welcome back to the program Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh. Welcome, Professor, to the program. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you very much for having me in these difficult circumstances to talk about difficult things. I appreciate your interest.
Well, first of all, it's been several months since we last spoke to you. What are the conditions like for you personally at the university in and around Bethlehem and Jerusalem?
Well, this project, the Zionist project that started 76 years ago, that made millions of us refugees and displaced people, and that has continuously pressured us to leave the country, and many of us did leave the country. About half the Palestinian population are outside the country, and half are still inside the country. But even in those areas where we are still, they have shrunk us or moved us from one place to another. For example, the Jordan Valley, which is only 20 miles away from me here, had 360 Palestinians living there. Now there's less than 60,000 Palestinians living there. This is ethnic cleansing, as you use the word correctly. And it's ethnic cleansing with genocide now, combined with the intensive genocide. For example, in Gaza, about 10% of the population is either killed, injured, or disappeared, so to speak. And in the West Bank, those shrinking ghettos like Bethlehem, like Jenin, like Tulkarem and Nablus, these shrinking ghettos are kept as concentration camps for the unwanted Palestinians. You can call them people warehouses to store us as unwanted, basically, as Israel takes over our country and our lands and our natural resources. That's what's happening in the West Bank, really intensifying dramatically in the past 10, 11 months, with 15 new colonial settlements that took over thousands and thousands of acres of land from Palestinians, and thousands of families have been displaced thanks to this process. And of course, Israel is also shooting people, killing people everywhere, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. Many places here, people are being killed and removed from their land. So the situation is very, very difficult. I've lived here, I was born here in the Bethlehem area, and since the Israeli occupation in 1967, I have not seen it worse than this. Doesn't mean it won't get any worse. We know what can be worse. What's happening in Gaza with outright genocide, with massive bombing using American weapons on civilian areas and destroying much of the infrastructure. But this is starting in the West Bank in places like Jenin refugee camp, which is now largely destroyed.
Wow. Yeah, I was about to ask you that specifically. What's going on in the West Bank right now? There's a lot of press about Israel's war crimes in Gaza, and in particular this new stage of genocide by starvation. But Israel's new attacks in Jenin and Tulkarem are not as widely covered by the U.S. press. Tell us what's going on in the West Bank.
Yes, I mean, part of it is Israel, of course, makes the propaganda effort in the West very successful because they have lobbies in the West. Much of it is controlled mainstream media that spouts whatever Israel hands them, regurgitates or parrots whatever the Israeli public relations want them to parrot. For example, claiming that this is a war by Iran on Israel, and that these Palestinians who are fighting to protect their land are not really doing it to protect their lands. They are just simply fighting on behest of Iran as a proxy. This is what they want the West to think, of course. They don't want the West to know that this is a classic colonization and that millions of Palestinians are impacted. And so far, since 1948, 250,000 or more of us have been killed. Over 1 million of us have been injured. Over 1.5 million have been imprisoned at one point or another for no reason other than being Palestinian, of course. And that this is similar to what happened to Native Americans, for example, in North America, or to Aborigines in Australia or anywhere else where European colonization is bent on taking over a country. They want the land, they don't want the people who come with the land. It's as simple as that. So they want maximum geography with minimum demography, as they put it actually themselves. So what is minimum demography? You either kill them, expel them, or both. This is basically the motto and the modus operandi of a colonial system, and that's what's happening here in the West Bank now. Yes, the West is not covering much about what's happening in the West Bank. That's also understandable, as I said, because of the control of the messaging that is being produced and the fact that politicians in the Western countries, politicians are bought and paid for by the Israeli lobbies or bribed and blackmailed now, increasing less about bribing, more about blackmailing politicians by having videos of them doing illicit things, as Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and others have done with American politicians like Donald Trump and others. So they're blackmailed to basically follow whatever the Zionists put in front of them to read.
Wow. Let's look at the history of the West Bank a little bit. It's been continuously occupied by Israel since 1967. And if you go all the way back to 1948, you have something called the Nakba, where Israel first tried to ethnically cleanse and had an official, formal program for doing so. Would you like to discuss the history of the occupation, but also the history of the Nakba?
Yeah, of course, we can talk a lot about history, but I can make it simpler to the audience. If you ask American public to draw a map of the United States at the time of independence, of the United States, many people will draw a map that looks like the modern day map. But the fact is, colonization was not like that. Colonization is always done in stages, and the United States started with the first 13 colonies, which is on a tiny fraction of the land that they eventually conquered. And then they went west, as I say, go west, young man. And then when they finished on the western coast, then they went to other places, including Hawaii and the Philippines and other places, and of course, Puerto Rico and so on. So that's how colonization is done. It's done in stages. In our cases, the stages are, has certain dates, and I won't bore your listeners with the details, but in 1948, Israel was created on 78% of historic Palestine and kicked out most of our people who lived on those 78% of the land. This is what we call the Nakba, which translates, it's an Arabic word that translates to catastrophe, basically. It's a catastrophe of our ethnic cleansing. And this was done by violence and by massacres that started right away in February 1948, even before the State of Israel was created in May 1948. My mother's best friend in school, for example, they were both teachers, and her friend was butchered in Deir Yassin with her students, in a classroom to drive them out. This is the Nakba. And then 19 years later, in 1967, Israel occupied the rest of historic Palestine west of the Jordan River, and that's the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and proceeded to do the same thing, ethnic cleansing, destruction of people's lives and livelihood. Right. And I must emphasize, our lives and livelihood go back thousands of years here. We are descendants of the first inhabitants that left Africa when humans migrated out of Africa 100,000 years ago. Homo sapiens left Africa to the rest of the world through Palestine. So there was continuous inhabitation of indigenous people in Palestine, tens of thousands of years. And the colonizers, mostly European Jews, came with the idea of taking a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, multilingual even society of indigenous people and transform it to become a Europeanized, quote-unquote, Jewish state.
Right. It's 16 minutes past the hour. You're listening to Heroes and Patriots. Our guest today, Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh, and we're discussing the West Bank and the atrocities going on there.
And he's an eyewitness. He's speaking to us from Bethlehem, where he teaches.
I would like to shift a little bit to, you mentioned the media earlier, and the message that we may or may not be an accurate message that we may or may not be receiving here in the States. What is the opinion of those who are living in the area in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and West Bank of the Americans? You know, we are still continuing funneling money through to Israel for weapons, and I can't believe that's a good look for the U.S.
Oh, and not just a little bit of money. The professor wrote an open letter to U.S. citizens back in November, just protesting the $14.8 billion that U.S. taxpayers were about to give Israel to buy weapons of mass destruction, to facilitate this genocide.
So what are your folks, your area, your colleagues? What is their reaction? What do they think is going on? Do they have an accurate picture? And do we have an accurate picture?
Well, the amount of money the U.S. have given to Israel is now in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yes,
right.
And wars that the U.S. Paid for on behalf of Israel, including the war in Iraq, which the war on the Iraqi people, which cost the taxpayers $3 trillion, and the useless war in Afghanistan that cost $2 trillion. We're talking, trillions of dollars added to the mushrooming U.S. debt. And I, as a U.S. citizen taxpayer, by the way, also because I lived in the U.S. and now I moved back to Palestine, but still I have to pay taxes, of course. You can never escape death or taxes, as they say. So, unfortunately, my taxes and your taxes are paying for genocide. So what do the people here think about this? They look at the U.S. not as a supporter of genocide. They look at the U.S. as a partner in genocide. And indeed it is a partner, a full partner in genocide. And not just because of the military weapons that they give them to kill civilians, they give Israel to kill civilians, but also because the U.S. shields Israel from international law. They shield them from the UN Security Council imposing sanctions on them like they did on South Africa under apartheid. So the U.S. actually protects Israel from obeying international law because this great superpower is basically the owner of this project. Israel is a project, by the way. Israel is not a country. Israel is a project called the Project of Zionism in the Middle East, to divide the Middle East, to keep the Middle East going in conflict forever and ever. This is the idea because they don't want the Arab world rising and becoming competitor with America or Europe in economy or anything else. And they want the oil and other resources of the Arab world.
I think that's probably the most important thing you said. I think that's probably one of the most important things we've heard in the 20 years we've been doing public radio. That Israel is not a country. Israel is a project. It's a project of Zionism to divide the Middle East in constant chaos and conflict. Just expand on that a little bit, Professor, please.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed. If we look at, for example, some people on the left, for example, tell me that the war on Iraq was for oil, but in reality, it was not for oil. The U.S. companies didn't get the oil in Iraq. Some people say it's because of weapons of mass destruction. We know there was no weapons of mass destruction. The reality is the oil companies were against the war in Iraq. There was no weapons of mass destruction. So who pushed for the war in Iraq? It was very clear. The Zionist lobby in Washington, D.C., which owns our Congress and owns our presidents, unfortunately, pushed for these wars. And these wars have been devastating for both U.S. long-term interests in the world, even economic interests, and also for reputation and for morality of the U.S. and for its image in the world. This has been horrible for the U.S. and is causing the US actually to decline as a superpower now. China is gaining up on us, as is Russia and other countries in the BRICS now coalition, and they're moving away from the dollar. So I think economically the US is going to continue to decline because they are held to this thing called the Zionist lobby. And I think this is why it's important for fellow Americans to wake up and understand the level of risk that they are undertaking by allowing this lobby to continue to operate as it is.
What can we do? We don't have much of a choice for president. Harris is really pro-Israel. Trump is pro-Israel. And when I say pro-Israel, I mean Israel right or wrong, unconditionally pro-Israel. So what can average Americans do? What can we do, here in rural Northern California?
It's a good question, and I thought about this a lot, and I tell you, there are things in the U.S. history that I'm very proud of as now a U.S. citizen. One of them is how we made change in U.S. society. How did we get women's right to vote? How did we get civil rights? How did we get 40-hour work week? How did we get to end the catastrophic war in Vietnam that those politicians kept pushing for? How did we get to stop U.S. support for apartheid in South Africa? All of these things happened in the U.S. because enough decent people like you and me and other people woke up in the U.S. and said, enough is enough. We have to change this, and mobilized and demonstrated and went into the streets and harassed, like Code Pink goes and harasses politicians like Anthony Blinken, who has not dual loyalties, by the way. His loyalties are with Israel, not with his boss, Biden. His loyalty is to Israel. And he came to Israel once and he said, I'm here as a fellow Jew. I'm not here as a U.S. Secretary of State. This is who he is. He is a lobbyist for Israel who's appointed to be Secretary of State simply because the lobby wanted him to be Secretary of State, or the Secretary of Treasury Yellen, or many others who are appointed simply because they are appointed by the lobbies, not because they are Jews, by the way, because there are many Jews, thousands and thousands of Jews like Code Pink, or If Americans Knew, or others, groups of Americans, Jewish Voice for Peace, Rabbis for Human Rights. These are Jews who believe in human rights, believe in what's right, and they say to America, stop this umbilical cord to Israel. Stop giving them all these weapons. So that's why I say the American public is waking up. I see it. Now the schools are coming back, by the way, strong, like Columbia University, Georgetown, others. They're trying to even legislate against them.
So we have just a few minutes remaining with you, Professor. You've kind of told us or outlaid an idea as to what could happen. With Netanyahu in power, that seems very dangerous given his inability to have a ceasefire and stop this war. Do you have any predictions or thoughts about further thoughts about this?
Well, I believe it's good to have those right-wing fascists run such projects as the Zionist project. I don't like colonialists who talk nice talk. Netanyahu tells you exactly what he thinks.
Yeah.
And he tells you he wants the land without the people, and he wants to enhance settlements, and he hates Palestinians, and he's waging war on Palestinians, and he's going to make Gaza flat as an area. So he says what's in his mind. So I support such honesty and openness from colonial settlers, who, by the way, his original name is Miliowski. He's Polish. He changed his name to sound Hebrew or Jewish. His family is from Poland, and his father and his family lived in the US for a while. He's a US citizen. He's dual US and Israeli citizen. So I think what we see there is basically a colonial settler who's of the fascist mentality. And I think is leading Israel to its demise. This project is leading it to its demise.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And in closing, where can our audience find out more about your work, Professor? And again, Americans are people of conscience. When Americans widely came to believe that apartheid was racist and wrong and morally outrageous in South Africa, they protested, they boycotted, they imposed an embargo on South Africa, and they acted. An even more dangerous and even more lethal apartheid state, racist state, is being opposed by Israel on the people of the West Bank and Palestine and Gaza. What can we do to wake up, and how can your work, the work that you do, be a catalyst in having us wake up to this apartheid mess?
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, people can reach out to us. We have the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. The website is palestinenature.org, and you can email me at info@palestinenature.org. You can also go to my own website, which is my last name.org. It's Qumsiyeh, QUMSIYEH.org, and you can email me also at that website. But on that website, I also have 76 ways that people can act for human rights, for justice, which will be, as I said, a win-win situation for all people, for American citizens, so that they are not funding genocide and not supporting genocide, for the long-term survival of Palestinians and Israelis, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, by the way, and Baha'i and Druze and other people here, who can live together in one country with democracy and equal rights for all. So join us on that. In fact, I have a meeting right after this about the one democratic state, where we have Jews, Christians, Muslims, others working towards this vision of sustainability for human and natural communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being a guest on our show and calling in from Bethlehem, Professor. I pray for you. I pray for the work that you're doing. You're in my daily prayers, and as Jews enter upon the holy days, more so. I'm bringing your message to our shul here in Redwood Valley, California. Shalom.
Thank you. Thank you. Shalom.
We've been speaking with Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh, who has founded the Palestine Museum of Natural History and the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University, where he teaches. He served on the faculties here in the States, University of Tennessee, Duke, and Yale. And since 2008, he researches and teaches at Bethlehem and Biodiversity universities. He is certified by the American Board of Medical Genetics in 2 specialties, clinical cytogenetics and molecular genetics. It's 9:30 here on the North Coast of California, 12:30 noon on the East. And we are going to be joined by our next guest, who is Abba Solomon. Excuse me. Mr. Solomon is the author of 2 books on Zionism, The Miasma of Unity, Jews and Israel, and The Speech and Its Context, Jacob Blaustein's speech, The Meaning of Palestine Partition to American Jews. He just wrote the piece, Why Are Liberal Zionists Cheering as Harris echoes Biden on Gaza, which states, quote, key to Harris's brief discussion of Gaza in her acceptance speech was the customary refusal in American political discourse to attribute the slaughter to the U.S. or its Israeli partner. Instead, there was a reference to what has happened, evoking victims without victimizers. And we now welcome, for the first time, Abba Solomon. Is it Abba or Ava?
Abba.
Abba. Thank you so much. Well, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Are you any relation to Norman Solomon, a great friend of our show?
Yes, actually. Yes, we are siblings.
Oh, even better. Great. I'm so happy to have you on the show. We tried to get your brother to debate our congressman, Jared Hoffman, on this show. And Jared Hoffman is scared. He's just scared out of his mind about your brother. Your brother has called him to task, as you know, time and time again in the Press Democrat, in the paper in Marin County. The one thing that Jared Hoffman will not do is confront your brother on Hoffman's unconditional support of Israel and the war budgets, the billions and billions and billions of dollars that Congress has funded for the genocide, the ethnic cleansing in Palestine. Why don't we launch the show right there?
Well, he is a congressman. He's dependent on you're dependent on a support system of donations, and really, this issue is a third rail, I believe is the expression, and it's getting more intense. This whole question of support for Israel becomes a question of: do you support American Jews? Do you support Jews? Are you anti-Semitic? It becomes very crazy very quickly, because the identification of the ethno-religious group, Jewish people in the United States, becomes an identification with that country created in 1948. The whole point of creating the Jewish state was, or in theory, Herzl's theory and other people's theory, was that we Jewish people would become a normal nationality. You have Jews all over the world for the last few thousand years becoming parts of their countries, but the theory of creating the state again, recreating Judea as a nationality, the intention was to create Jews as normal people. That was the theory. In other words, that we were living an abnormal existence because we lived around the world. We were parts of countries. But we would become normal again if there was a country that was the Jewish nation with borders and an army. There are unanticipated consequences of that. You could say, the idea is it accentuates the idea of dual loyalty. That Jews are loyal to Jews, but then also not quite reliable as citizens of the country they're in. And the creation of the state accentuates that mistrust of Jews, accentuates the ambiguity of what is this ethno-national group. Edwin Montagu, a member of the British cabinet at the time of the Balfour Declaration, pointed out, or he said that the Balfour Declaration was anti-Semitic in effect, if not in intent. He was anticipating that it would have unanticipated and negative effects on Jews to declare Judaism a nationality from our tribal origins, you could say. And this is really coming to a head now. This has been a tough year. It's been a tough year for Gazans, of course.
Right.
But this has also brought to a special head the difficulty of advocating for Israel and being an American citizen.
Right.
And trying to figure out, are we Americans, if we're Jewish, are we Americans only kind of temporarily? Is there a true Jewish identity which requires us to identify with this foreign government and what their army is doing? It's been a nightmare. It's becoming a nightmare.
Yeah, this has been this is something I've agonized over, but years ago, not now, because I've come to see what our last guest has proposed in his thesis, that Israel is not so much as a country with borders, but as a Zionist project used to create chaos and conflict in the Middle East, so as to divide the Arab world. My background is I am a direct descendant of Kazimierz Sakowicz. He's got a small Wikipedia page. He was the first to document the mass murder of Jews in World War II. I am a direct descendant of him, and he documented the slaughter of 100,000 Jews in the Polish-Lithuanian border, for his trouble, the Nazis targeted him and gunned him down while he was on a bicycle in Operation Tempest years later. I'm his great nephew, and this is something I've agonized over because our family has been impacted, by anti-Semitism, and I'm the last person who wants to be called anti-Semitic if I criticize Israel. But I've come to believe that there is a very clear distinction between Zionism and being Jewish.
Naturally, yes.
Please explain that to explain the difference to our audience.
Well, until 1948, Jewish people did not have a country. They had an origin story from the being driven out by the Romans is the idea, though there's a question about the historicity of the dispersion. Were we pushed out of Palestine, or did we simply emigrate into Egypt, Syria, Europe, the Greek and Roman world? But the emergence in the late 1800s of the Zionist movement was a specific ideology that people were looking at the misfortunes and the difficulties of Jews, especially in Eastern Europe, and trying to find a solution. The people in the Russian Empire, basically, under the control and under what was set up as a more despotic, highly structured Eastern European empire, where Jews were stigmatized. But this idea of Herzl and others was to make a modern nation. You had transportation and communications, which made it much more practical. This wouldn't have been possible before the 20th century, with steamships, even aircraft, to reassemble large numbers of people in Palestine, large numbers of Jews in Palestine. At the time of the inception, at the 1890s, there were not that many Jews living in Palestine. But this was a concerted effort to organize settlements, colonies within Palestine, with the idea of creating a homeland. That was the phrase of the Balfour Declaration, was a Jewish homeland. It didn't say state. The British did not guarantee a state. The idea was that this would be some sort of structure for a Jewish national home. But it wasn't necessarily control, which is and pushing out and disturbing the lives of other people in Palestine. But that was the ambition of the political Zionists. There are also there's cultural Zionism. There's Zionism that did not imply statehood and control and domination, but they won out within the Jewish community. The ones who were armed, the ones who wanted to intimidate and deter Arabs from asserting a national identity and political control of Palestine. The British helped in the settlement during the Mandate period, but they were trying to fulfill the other aspect of the Balfour Declaration, which was that this Jewish homeland or national home would not infringe on the civil and political rights of others who lived in Palestine. In the American Jewish community, which is an interest that I have, and American Zionism within the American Jewish community, this was a minority project in the first part of the last century. It was considered kind of fanaticism, and there was a lot of fanaticism in it. The Jabotinsky, Ben Gurion idea of setting up militias, developing more and more military strategies. And this is military strategies rather than any kind of effort at integration. In other words, like the Histadrut, the Jewish enterprises and labor movement the idea was Hebrew labor, was to not hire and not integrate economic efforts within other people's, within the economy of Palestine. It was to set up an entirely parallel society, which is why in 48, it wasn't that hard to simply evict 750,000 Arab Palestinians from the new state, because their structure that they had set was Hebrew language and was employment of Jews. The idea was, if we are, we're going to be self-sufficient. We're going to create this new ideal world where Jews are a majority and where we aren't dependent on interactions with others. And that's really where we are now. Is Palestinians, for instance, in the West Bank, are other than as casual labor, and well, that's been important, but they aren't necessary to the future of the Jewish state. They can take the land and they don't really need the people. And as you see in the West Bank, they're trying to make it more and more untenable for people who are not Jewish to continue in their communities. There's more and more pogroms and military action to declare more land, military or state land, and push people off. The ideal for the state and for this project since 48 is more land, less non-Jews.
Right. 707-923-3911 if you'd like to ask Abba Solomon a question about today's topic. We are 44 minutes after the hour. And I wondered, Abba, if we could talk about your specific article and the administration and its lack of accountability. You know, obviously honoring the victims and being sorrowful and all that. But the accountability in your article seems to be missing.
Yeah, and where Democrats went wrong.
Well, you have American Jews who are drafted in to the project of lobbying. And by the way, Christian Zionists, there's Christian Zionist organizations which are important also. Wow. But you have donors and supporters in various parts, all around the country, who are telling their congressmen, this state we feel connected with. This is part of our identity. And this is explicitly said in Zionist doctrine, is that this is the expression of Jewish life and Jewish survival, is this state. So any threat to that, examination of weaponry that's being used for damage to civilian life, any kind of the invocation of the Leahy Amendment about American weapons use is going to be really a threat against Jews. So it all becomes very crazy very quickly.
It does. We have a caller, Abba. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question. Okay, go ahead with your question. Sorry.
Oh, hi. First of all, I want to say I'm a Jew. And to the first Palestinian guest, I am so sorry. If I could stop this, I would every day. That's my word, stop. My ancestors are European Jews who came to America, as far as I know. So that's a long time. And they moved all the way into the southern part of America. And the American Jews, we say they're Spanish, the Spanish that conquered or colonized South America. They're Jews who colonized, and you mentioned it, the current guest said that. So there's but we're mixed. We're Arab, we're Muslim, we're everything. And that's how we came to America from Spain, as we were a mixture of peoples. So what's going on right now in Israel is absolutely horrible. It's like something that it's just not normal. So it shouldn't be named Israel. It should be U.S. because it's really not.
We have another caller that we're going to take. I didn't really hear a question more than observation. Second caller, if you're with us, please go ahead with your question.
Hi there. One of the statements that was made earlier in the program was that there is no choice in the election this year in terms of support for the genocide currently going on in Gaza and in Israel. My sense is that indeed the candidate from the Democratic Party is invested in the current policy coming from the Biden years and before. My sense also is that while the Republican candidate has been called duplicitous and erratic and all of these things, he is, number one, a deal maker. And he is also very devoted to the notion that we don't get involved in things unless there's a real American national interest. And I think he would see but being a part of a genocide is certainly not in the American national interest. And if he could cut a deal, that's what he prides himself on. If he could cut a deal, whether it's with Arabs or whether it's with Palestinians or whether it's with whomever, to get us out of this, that would be his agenda item number one in January of next year.
Thank you, caller. Abba, would you like to react?
Yes. That might be a continuation of what was the Abraham Accords, really, which was a deal, the idea of a deal of governments, but not really much conception of what the forces are. The forces are now a dispossessed 5 million Palestinians, 6 million Palestinians in the territories and in the in other words, the governments can make deals, but until the Palestinians have a normal life and a normal national expression of their life, it doesn't solve anything. We are getting, by the way, seems to be in the West Bank and Gaza, something like a Battle of Algiers situation, where I think there's simply going to be more and more guerrilla action and more resistance against the state of Israel.
Excuse me, Abba. We have about 8 minutes. We have 2 more callers waiting. How about we take another call?
Hello. Thank you for this program. How can you have a democracy built around a religion that excludes the entire population of people that don't have the same faith? And is democracy even part of the state of Israel? And
it is, in the sense that people who are Israeli citizens, no matter their faith, do have full civil rights. The problem is that the state is established on a great ethnic cleansing in '48. You have people who legitimately should be part of the voting populace who are sitting in refugee communities in Gaza and the West Bank and in Jordan and Syria.
Right. Let's take that last call. Caller, if you're listening and can hear us, go ahead with your brief question.
So yes, I'm 77 years old, and I finally figured out a thing or two. Where does hatred come from? It's not a natural human emotion. And so then I had to figure out, well, no, it may not be natural, but it's prevalent because that's what happens when you hate yourself. You project it out. So I just really wanted to make that comment. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, caller. Abba, do you have a thought on that?
I think that people they always have to be something. You have to be some ethnicity. You have to have some group you identify with. And then how you work that out with interacting with other people is always a problem. But it doesn't have to be bad.
It's interesting because this whole idea of hate and self-hate is an issue I've struggled with. Because when, given my lineage with a World War II hero who investigated Nazi war crimes, when I've criticized Israel and Zionism, I've had Jews and Israelis call me a self-hating Jew.
Oh yes, and they even will call for. Yes, they will even call for the death of people within the Jewish community who are betraying. They say.
Right. Yeah. So it's a thing. Why don't we have a very few precious moments with you, about 5 minutes. First of all, I am so happy that we have another Solomon on the show. You're now part of the family. Can we consider you part of the family? We're going to have.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, we're going to have you back. Your article on Kamala Harris and the Democratic National Convention is really distressing to me. But locally here, in the context of our congressman Jared Hoffman, we have a congressman who is unrelenting. He is unbending in his support for Israel. We've tried to have him on the show. He's a prima donna about it. He's fussy. He won't be on the air with any critic, including your brother. And it goes to the fact that he is afraid of AIPAC coming out against him in the primary. Now, as you know, here in the California 1st District, we live in a gerrymandered district. Democrats will win from now until the end of time. We're a coastal district from Marin County all the way up to the Oregon border. So a Democrat's going to win every time. So Democrats are not afraid of Republicans in our district, but they are afraid of truly progressive Democrats in the primary. What can we do to make our primary more representative of the constituents' feelings about genocide and ethnic cleansing in Palestine? What can we do?
I think pointing up the spending of AIPAC is a good thing, because people don't like the idea of many tens of millions of dollars spent in their districts to influence their local elections.
Right. We have another caller to take us off the air. Caller, if you're listening, please be brief. And what is your question?
Do you think that the Republicans have made a deal with Netanyahu to keep this thing going and not release the hostages because it would make Biden look good? Kind of like what Reagan did with the hostages during the Iran-Contra.
Interesting.
Thank you, caller. Abba?
It's a horrible thought, but I don't dismiss it. I don't have a problem believing it.
So, we're just a minute or so away from our time being over. You've been writing about the election and the Democrats' government's position on, we feel really bad about all this, but we're not going to hold accountability. How can people follow this out to its completion and
follow your work?
And follow your work.
Well, AbbaSolomon.com will get you to my website. There's a lot of good organizations. Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now. There's a lot of this. Well, for my interest is in how the American Jewish community can reconceptualize what it is to be a Jew and to separate out from the militarism and the built-in oppression of the creation of the state in Israel, in Palestine.
And what can we do during this election season?
Oh, this is such a hard choice because, you want to support somebody who's going to defeat Donald Trump because of what this would do to the United States to have another Trump administration. And then at the same time, I think speaking out loudly as Jewish Americans that we don't buy the Jewish nationalist conception of Jewish life, that we're American citizens, we have principles about our ideals about what kind of human rights we support and what genocidal activities we don't want to be financing. So I think speaking out.
Yeah, I was here in Mendocino County. Jared Hoffman was at our Labor Day picnic, and I was going to go to protest with some friends from the Mendocino Environmental Center, and I was asked not to.
Really?
Sakowicz, there you go again. Being combative, being adversarial, just being a royal pain in the butt. Can you just give us one day with the congressman to celebrate later? So I backed off. But I want to say that it was probably a mistake. And organizations like Roots Action and other organizations here in the United States, peace activists like Matthew Ho, who's a great friend of our show, must constantly be in the face of politicians like Kamala Harris at the national level and Jared Hoffman at the local level, calling them to task to be people of conscience. It's that simple. The Hamas attack that ignited this war was a war crime in and of itself and terrible. But Israel has created hundreds of times more casualties in its reaction against the people of Palestine. So it's a matter of magnitude, and the magnitude is now one that encompasses genocide.